Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our closing plenary session, Virtual Advocacy Strategies and Successes in the COVID-19 Era. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Misty Crosby. I'm Executive Director of Buckeye Hills Regional Council in Marietta, Ohio, and I'm also First Vice President of NADO, and I'm going to be moderating our final session today, so thank you for joining us. I hope you all have enjoyed and gained some valuable insight and training this week during NADO's virtual annual training conference, and thank you all for attending. I also want to thank NADO President Kevin Bird for his leadership during these unprecedented times, and to my colleagues who are serving with me on the executive committee. They are all passionate regional leaders, and I'm humbled and proud to be serving alongside of each one of them. I wish you all could have been with me in Cleveland this year. Ohio was really looking forward to rolling out the red carpet, but hopefully we'll be together in person soon. So this final closing session is focused on virtual advocacy strategies. The aim of the closing session is to provide an opportunity to reflect on some of NADO and NADO's members' successful advocacy efforts over the past few months, and to hear about how NADO's legislative team engaged with the NADO membership and with congressional offices to secure some exciting legislative victories. This includes securing $1.5 billion in funding for EDA that was included in the CARES Act, and the successful passage of the RLF Act of 2020, which defederalizes EDA revolving loan funds. Yay. Our discussion today will also lend an opportunity to think creatively and strategically about some approaches and strategies that may help our audience advocate for future priorities as well. During the session, the audience is invited to ask questions of the panelists at any time by typing your question into the questions box onto the GoToWebinar control panel box on your screen, and we'll respond to these questions toward the end of the session. The panelists you're going to hear from during this closing session are Dawn Haglund. She's Executive Director of the Upper Minnesota Valley Regional Development Commission in Appleton, Minnesota. Paul Tuss, Executive Director of Bear Paw Development Corporation in Havre, Montana. Jason Vincent, Executive Director of the Pennyroyal Area Development District in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And Becky Corby, she's a Government Relations Specialist at the Ridge Policy Group in Washington, D.C. Before I turn it over, on behalf of the NADO Executive Committee, I want to personally thank Joe, Muriel, and the entire NADO staff for their successful advocacy and research efforts on behalf of the NADO memberships. Some of this work has taken years to bring across the finish line, and the staff we have working on our behalf in DC is outstanding. And now I'm going to turn it over to Muriel Burgoyne, NADO's Director of Government Relations, to provide some context for our discussion and to explain how NADO helped facilitate the legislative victories that we'll be discussing today. Muriel?
Thank you, Misty. Thank you so much for that opening introduction. I really appreciate it. For those who don't know me, I'm Muriel Burgoyne. I'm the Director of Government Relations for NADO, based in Washington, D.C. And before we get the panel discussion started, I just want to provide some context for the discussion you'll hear from the rest of the panelists today during our closing session. I just kind of want to explain how some of NADO's advocacy efforts and victories this year unfolded. And then more importantly, you'll hear from everybody else about their absolutely fundamental roles in making it all happen. We couldn't have done any of this without the NADO membership, without the panelists joining us today, without many different organizations and associations that helped make it all happen. But to kind of set the context, Joe McKinney and I really hit the ground running on advocacy with an elevated sense of urgency in early March, as it was becoming increasingly clear how significantly disruptive the COVID-19 crisis might be for communities. I mean, back in March, there was still a lot we didn't know, but what we could surmise was that communities were going to need help, small businesses were going to need financial support, and local governments were facing monumental challenges that were going to require them to improvise. So how it all kind of started was that we had an initial discussion in mid-March with a contact in Senate Minority Leader Schumer's office, whom NADO has worked with for a long time. And during that discussion, it became clear how quickly things were moving on the Hill toward a major relief package. And at that point, I think Joe and I knew we had to pivot. We knew we had to act quickly if we were going to successfully advocate for resources for NADO members. We were going to have to move really fast. So that same day, essentially, after that conversation with the Hill, we outlined some initial legislative priorities that were specific to COVID-19 response. And we relayed those priorities to some of our Hill contacts and began circulating those ideas pretty much immediately to a couple of Hill offices and committee staffers that we had worked closely with in the past. And those priorities we circulated were largely based on ongoing conversations that we've had with NATO members over time. I think that's important to say because there was a huge foundation that NATO members had laid previously to all of this starting that allowed us to succeed in the moment that we had an opportunity. Shortly thereafter, we began an engagement with the Ridge Policy Group with Becky, who you'll hear from during this discussion. Becky's work has also been absolutely instrumental to our successful advocacy efforts over the past 7 months. And most of you kind of know what happened next and what has happened since, but just to kind of recap, so the CARES Act was signed into law on March 27th, and it contained $1.5 billion in funding for the U.S. Department of Commerce, EDA, that NATO and the Ridge Policy Group advocated for with help from other organizations in the EDA coalition and NATO members. And really, it took a village. Many different folks were involved, but the CARES Act passed in March. After that, EDA guidance was released on May 7th, and that EDA guidance, I think, really showed that EDA was understanding the needs of NATO members, including some really new and sort of never before done innovative elements, such as the automatic non-competitive funding for EDDs, and the automatic recapitalization of existing revolving loan funds in good standing. And I really commend EDA for recognizing the need to get funding out to their institutional partners quickly, because I believe that that information that NATO had provided, kind of past and present, kind of helped emphasize those community needs. And so EDA sort of heard us loud and clear, and we could really see that in the guidance that came out. After that point, once RLFs had been recapitalized, Joe, Becky, and I started focusing all of our energy and attention on RLF defederalization, because we felt that the most important thing we could do at that juncture would be to help ensure that the increased EDA funding was relieving some of the burden for communities and not adding to the burden for communities, in the sense of adding administrative workload, perpetual reporting, et cetera, for RLF fund operators. So I'm thrilled again to be able to say we were able to be successful there. We were able to facilitate the introduction of 2 identical concurrent bipartisan bills introduced, one in the House, one in the Senate. That bill passed in the Senate in August. It passed in the House on October 1st, and we anticipate that it will soon be signed by the President. Our bipartisan Senate champions who introduced that legislation were Senator Capito of West Virginia and Senator Cardin of Maryland. NATO members helped us garner the support and the leadership of both of those offices. Our bipartisan House champions were Representative Peterson of Minnesota, which Don will talk about today, and Rep. Katko of New York. We were also very grateful to all the co-sponsors that signed on to demonstrate support. That was also really instrumental to kind of showing that this was bipartisan legislation that we could pass using the procedural methods. So both senators from Montana co-sponsored the Senate bill. Paul Tess will talk about his role in that, and then Jason Vincent and others helped us garner the support of Senate Majority Leader McConnell. So with that, I want to turn it back to Misty and back to our panelists to each talk about their role and their experience of how all of this happened, as well as how they built those relationships before we needed them. I think that's the biggest lessons learned here, was that groundwork was laid early. And so, you know, and I think when there's a crisis, kind of everyone comes out of the woodworks needing funding. We were able to get on the radar of policymakers because they already knew us and they already knew you. So I want to say thank you to everyone who helped mobilize their relationships previous to all of this happening, and since. Props to many of you who have done just that. And now I'll turn it back to Misty and the rest of the panel.
Great, and thank you, Marielle, really for your hard work. So my first question today is going to be for Don, Jason, and Paul. Can each of you describe how you engaged with NATO and/or with your congressional delegation to help garner support for the RLF Act? And Don, I'm going to ask you to go first, and then Jason, and then Paul.
Thanks, Misty, and to NADO for hosting this session today. I wish we were all in person seeing each other, but I guess seeing everybody virtually is better than nothing. I just want to share, I think from our perspective, I probably have a very unique story to share about the RLF Act, in that the field staff for Congressman Colin Peterson, who covers a big swath of Minnesota territory, but one of his top field staff was a former employee and coworker of mine. And when she was on staff in our office, she managed our EDA planning grant, she managed our RLF program. And when she was in our office, we worked together on advocacy around defederalizing the RLF. We did visits on the Hill to our congressional delegation at the time. And so as it ended up, when she left our office and went to work for the congressman, we stayed in really close contact and regularly talked about policy initiatives, and I shared NATO policy briefs as well as kind of Minnesota-based policy briefs with her. And when we attended the NATO policy conference on the Hill and went to meet with Colin Peterson and his DC staff, she had already laid some groundwork with the congressman and his DC staff. And then after our meeting in DC, when we came back to the state, I kind of reported back on how those meetings went with the congressman and with other delegation that we visited with in Minnesota. So I really think we kind of had a unique situation where because of our great relationship with a former employee, when she left and went to another place, she was really in a position to help us in a very positive way. She had really insider knowledge that probably doesn't happen all that often. And so, again, we had a really unique situation of having a very strong advocate who had an ear of one of our congressional delegation. And I think in Minnesota, a unique thing about Congressman Peterson is he has, again, a huge swath of rural Minnesota, and his congressional district actually covers all or part of 8 of the 10 RDOs in Minnesota. So again, it wasn't just our office that his district covered, but he really touched a big part of many RDOs in Minnesota. So when we went together, we really represented a lot of constituency in his district. So again, it's probably a pretty unique relationship, but that's how we helped Congressman Peterson really help champion this bill.
Great.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks, Misty. I first also want to say thank you to NATO for asking me to participate in this session, and more importantly, thank NATO for the work that you all have done on behalf of all the regional councils. And I'm sure that I'm speaking for many of you all, many of our regional councils, when I say that NATO's work, especially on the EDA, the disaster recovery funding, it really has breathed new life into our community and economic development departments, and is really producing new and expanding levels of engagement with many of our communities. So again, just wanted to say thank you. But sort of similar to Don's story, when we talk about how we engaged our delegation to support the RLF Act, it really goes back to a relationship that I have built over the years with a staff member of Leader McConnell's staff. And actually now he recently, or I guess a couple years ago at this point, is the chief of staff for Leader McConnell. And I'll get into, I guess, our relationship a little bit more in just a minute. But honestly, I was able to take the information that Muriel and Joe and everyone else at NATO had put together. Thank you for that, by the way. That information that they put together about the act, and I think really importantly, we took performance data from our RLF fund and packaged that into just a single request for support to the chief of staff of Senator McConnell. And I think it's always very important when asking for support on a particular issue that you always provide specific data detailing how a program has benefited the region. And in this case, I gave them information on our RLF program and the investments and jobs that it has generated over the years. And then we also put together a few projections on how we felt future RLF loans could benefit small businesses in our region. So that's really how we approached our support or gaining support from our congressional representation, especially Leader McConnell's office.
Misty, is it my turn?
It's your turn, Paul.
Okay. Well, thanks for that introduction. Listen, thanks for the question. We relied on NADO significantly. I can talk all day about what Bear Paw Development does with regard to our revolving loan fund. I can't talk all day about the history of this legislation and specifically what was in the bill. So we relied significantly on NADO. And so thank you for that, to be able to provide me with the ammunition that I needed from a technical perspective to talk to not just our congressional delegation, but their staff members. That was a really big deal. We're one of only 5 states this election cycle that has a presidential election, a gubernatorial election, and a Senate election. So we're on campaign mode all time, all day, every minute of the day. And so some of the secret sauce for Bear Paw Development was Senator Tester, our senior U.S. senator, was our state senator. So he represented northern Montana, and I am physically right now in his old state Senate district. And Senator Tester used to be my butcher. So Senator Tester used to bring a quarter beef to my house on a regular basis, and so I know him very well. And so everyone else here has talked very eloquently about that personal relationship. Well, we have it with Senator Tester. And given the politics of Montana this particular cycle, nobody wants to be behind the curve, right? So once we had Senator Tester on board with this, it was very, very easy to go to the other members of the delegation. And by the way, we only have 3, and that includes the House and the Senate, to be able to get them on board with this particular legislation. And I can tell you the one nugget that we got from NADO, which was so helpful, was when the congressional folks found out that you have to report in perpetuity on loans, even if the loan was paid off 20 years ago, that's a head scratcher for them. They're like, are you kidding? Really? We're making you do this? So that one little nugget, we were able to leverage that one little nugget of information, and they're like, oh, well, we're on board. We're on board with this. So really, the other thing that was really helpful, in addition to our organization, is that there's 10 other economic development districts spread statewide. So this wasn't just a Bear Paw thing. This wasn't just our little part of Montana thing. Most of the economic development districts have fairly substantial revolving loan funds. So I was able to rely on my colleague executive directors throughout Montana to do the same thing I was doing, which is to contact the congressional delegation about this particular piece of legislation. So really, it was a statewide effort in our state.
Great, Paul. Thanks so much. And I agree on the comments about NADO and their messaging and how they organize us, I guess. So Becky, the next one's for you. You began working with NADO before the CARES Act was passed, and your hard work really paved the way for the success. So thank you so much. Your efforts were instrumental to the $1.5 billion in funding for EDA that was included in the CARES Act, and you also facilitated the introduction and the passage of the RLF Act. Can you talk about the steps you took and the strategic advice you gave to NADO, and how you really worked with Muriel and Joe, and how you mapped out the big picture of what needed to happen to get to this point?
Yeah, thank you, Misty. And I just want to say thank you to Muriel and Joe and the NADO board for letting us partner with you. So the Rich Policy Group, we have we are a small boutique firm, and we really find that economic development is a space that we are very passionate about and have really enjoyed working with NADO on these issues, and look forward to continuing working with you all. And so just thank you for allowing that partnership to happen. You are right, we started right at the thick of CARES Act happening. Marielle and Joe and I were on phone calls most mornings, afternoons, and evenings, and trying to figure out best ways to get EDA funding included. Those bills were very large at the beginning, and a lot of programs were trying to get funded. We relied heavily on the fact that EDA funding is, the EDA is included in the National Disaster Assistance Framework, the NDRF. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, and it allocates the Department of Commerce as the economic recovery agency, and then points that to the EDA. And so we continued to educate staff on that statute and to show that EDA has had previous history of disaster supplemental appropriations, and that they are a resource and a good partner for communities to recover from disasters. And so we really pushed that message on the Hill. We did this through, like Marielle mentioned, meetings with Senate and House leadership, specifically Senator Schumer's office. We continued to have appropriations meeting. We met with Senator Moran's office, both the Commerce Justice on both sides, both the House and the Senate. And so we really strive to educate those staff and to encourage them to include the EDA funding. We sent joint letters with other organizations that are included in the Economic Development Coalition, and we again tried to form group messaging so that we were all on the same page asking for similar requests. And I think that is really helpful when there is one voice going to the Hill asking for one request. It is much easier to get that. And then, just so you all know, because I think this is really important, the $1.5 billion is 5 times the annual EDA budget. And so to really sit in that and to see how successful Marielle and Joe were in getting this money, and really how successful all of your relationships with the Hill have been over the years, because it's much easier for us to point to what you guys are doing with the EDA funding in your local communities and show that this is a good agency who is putting money in the hands of good people who are doing good things. And so it is not wasteful spending, it is not duplicative spending, but that it is changing economies and changing communities. So that is a big pat on the back to all of you, that the Appropriations Committee and that the leadership felt confident in giving EDA that additional money. So that is kind of where we sat with CARES. And then for the RLF Act, we kind of had a few different tracks going for this. I'm sure many of you know that Joe and Marielle have been working on RLF for a long time. NADO has been working on RLF for a long time. And so we really picked up and started to educate staff on the need to defederalize this program. Jason and Paul, like you mentioned, staff are really shocked when they hear that you need to report on a loan in perpetuity. That does blow their mind, especially when staff are 23 years old and you're telling them that you're reporting on a loan that's 23 years old. It really shocks them. And so it gets their gears going and they think like, this isn't right. And so we started to have more and more of those conversations. First, we really looked at both the committees of jurisdiction. So in the Senate, the EPW committee, and in the House, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And so we really targeted those committees and those members that would be most interested. We were successful in getting language included in the House Heroes Bill to defederalize RLF, which was a very big win, and it was a way that we could point to that this is a non-controversial bipartisan effort and that we needed to then expand it out. And so when we realized that the Senate was not going to take up the HEROES Act, we knew that we had to find a standalone champions. And so that is when we then turned to Senators Capito and Cardin in the Senate, and then Representative Peterson and Katko in the House. And again, that is because of the relationships that many of you have built over the years, that we were able to easily go to them and ask them to lead these efforts, which then they all agreed to do, which was really great. So it took a lot of conversation, a lot of phone calls, but at the end we were successful, and yeah, just building the co-sponsorship and the coalitions around it.
Thank you very much, Becky. I really appreciate that. And it's so nice to meet you virtually and see your face. So next up, I want to ask Dawn and Jason and Paul again to talk about what you did to build those relationships with your respective congressional delegations prior to the start of the pandemic. I know you've touched on this a little bit, but also anything that you've done to continue to build and foster those relationships during the pandemic. So can you each of you talk about how you've built those strong relationships over time, and then about how laying that groundwork has really served your organization well? And we'll go in the same order. I'll ask Dawn, then Jason, and then Paul. Thanks.
Thanks, Misty. Again, I think we heard some of this in the comments from other panelists already. And I think in Minnesota, one of the reasons I think that we've been successful is because our kind of group, our statewide network of RDOs has really proactively come together to form some common policy statements, some of those talking points, consistent talking points that we've used collectively to talk to both state and congressional delegation. We really have made an effort to collect success stories, examples, data, data about what our RLFs have done in terms of jobs created, jobs retained, private sector funding leverage. We collected data from all our revolving loan funds in the state, and we really use that to tell the story. And I think because we've come together as a state and again, really focused on some priority areas that we could all agree on, and then we consistently have used those when we've gone out and talked to a delegation. We've looked for places to make connections, whether that's at the state level, and we've done some broadband day on the Hill advocacy, different state conferences where we have interaction with policymakers or their staff. Certainly NADO events like the policy conference, and again, we use those common statewide talking points and examples when we went and made those visits. And whether it was one of us making a visit, we kind of carried the load for our whole network, or whether we really worked together to make some of those visits. As an example, generally when we do the NATO policy conference, and there's a handful of our Minnesota RDOs at the conference, we make appointments together to go visit our delegation together. We talk about those common talking points. We share those stories. That's really important. And share that data, as Jason mentioned, because that's really important. And I think that's part of the reason why we've built up relationships over the years and have been able to tell the story of what RDOs have been doing back in their districts.
All right, well, I also want to mention our state network, and I can't say enough about how that network helps all 15 area development districts here in the state garner those relationships, both at the state and federal level. We have a very active legislative committee that helps with that. But regarding our organization here at the Plenary Area Development District, and I'm sure is similar with many of you all, the local congressional field representatives attend our monthly board meetings to provide updates to our group. This also gives them an opportunity to see and hear about the activities that are taking place at our regional council. And we also provide them with an overview, whether that's on a weekly or monthly basis, of all the projects that we're working on, even if they don't necessarily include federal funding. I just like to have something with Plenary Area Development District on front of them at all times. But may be a good time to bring this up, and please don't take this that I don't value a relationship with the actual congressional member, because we do, but we really put a focus on making sure that the staff remain in the loop with all of our activities. And that's really where we've been able to make headway on the RLF bill. I try to meet up with Leader McConnell's chief of staff about every time that I'm in DC. His progression through the McConnell office has sort of taken the same time frame as mine here at the ad. So we've really had a long history together, and I can't overemphasize really, I guess, the relationship with the staff. Secondly, the NATO policy conference and other fly-ins, and I'll just be blunt, if you don't take advantage of the NATO policy conference that occurs typically in the spring, you're really missing an opportunity. And in fact, I usually try, if all possible, not only to attend the NATO policy conference, but also attend most of the other fly-ins that are coming in from our region. And just a few examples of those, of course, we're home to Fort Campbell here in Kentucky. They always take a Friends of Fort Campbell to DC. Various chamber legislative fly-ins, Kentuckians for Better Transportation, just to name a few. But we try to get up there and get in front of them as much as we can. Of course, this is obviously pre-COVID, but we do put a major focus on the NATO policy conference, as 100% of our congressional visits are spent talking about the Plenary Area Development District, Kentucky initiatives, as well as NATO initiatives, and really thanking the members and the staff for their support. And every year, as part of the policy conference, I found this very helpful. We prepare a brochure that we call Investing in the Plenary, which is an overview of all the federally funded activities that take place under our umbrella. And I guess the best way to describe it is an impact brochure, and I'd be happy to share that brochure with anyone who is interested. But it not only helps us stay on point with our discussions with the members and the staff, it's also something that we leave behind so they can reference it after we're gone. So we feel that that's very important. Now, unfortunately, with the pandemic, we obviously haven't been face-to-face with these folks, but we do include them in all of our monthly Zoom board meetings. And if you're like me, I am exhausted with Zoom meetings, but it also gives an opportunity for individuals outside our region, outside our state, to link up with us during our meetings on a more regular basis. We also try to host a virtual discussion with our congressional members every couple of months. Most recently, we had Congressman Comer, who spent a couple of hours or an hour or so with our board members, just basically giving a federal update and answering some questions from our group. So again, I just suggest take advantage of all the virtual capabilities, because it does make it easier to bring them into meetings that they normally wouldn't be able to attend.
In terms of what we have done in Montana, I don't know that we've done anything necessarily special since the pandemic has come on board, that everybody else hasn't already talked about. We're using technology like what we're using today, but the truth is that if you don't have those relationships when the bad times come, and you haven't established those when it's not a global pandemic, you're kind of in trouble. There's a lesser known Kennedy quote from President Kennedy. It's the time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining, right? You don't want to get up there when the hail's coming, when the snow is coming, like we have in Montana today, or when it's raining. You want to repair the roof when it's good times. And I think that has a lot to do with the relationship that everybody on this call has with their congressional delegation. You don't want to show up for the very first time on their doorstep with hat in hand, right? You want to be able to have a relationship, a normal relationship. I put that in air quotes. So when the bad times do come, they know that you were there in the good times as well. And I really think there's no way of getting around establishing that relationship. You have to do it the old-fashioned way. You have to earn it. And so some of the things that we have done in the past and what we continue to do, and I'm assuming that we'll certainly do in the future, is we oftentimes have members of Montana's congressional delegation as speakers to our annual meeting or our quarterly meetings with our board of directors, our strategy committee meeting. They'll oftentimes come in, if it works for their schedule and they're in state, to be able to have them come in. And we obviously do that on a bipartisan basis. We also feature them in our newsletter, and we let them know what's happening with regard to bear paw development with our newsletter. And the congressionals are not the only people that get our newsletter, but all of their staff members get our newsletter as well. Our organization has also kind of become the organization locally and regionally that a lot of our congressional folks use for listening sessions and town halls. So we've established the type of relationship that if they're going to be in our community, rather than going to the Boys and Girls Club or the county or the city or the university, they'll come to Bear Paw Development. We have a facility that can host them here. So we're open to that type of thing. And again, we do that on a very nonpartisan basis. And that is really, that bears fruit when you do come knocking when you need something. And finally, and I think that everybody else has said this, we try not to forget to say thank you, because we're oftentimes asking for stuff. In fact, we're always asking for stuff. And so the truth is that we have to listen to that mom that's telling us always be grateful. And so we are grateful, and we try to remind ourselves to always say thank you to our congressional delegation when they step up to the plate like we asked them.
Oh, those are great points. And Jason, sharing your impact report I'd be very interested in that. I know Ohio's Appalachian Regional Councils, we put together an impact report as well. So happy to share that, after this. And we all like to be there for the good times. So it makes sense to be reminded of that and the thank you. So that's great. So Becky, in your role, what's it been like for you to pursue these advocacy priorities during the COVID-19 pandemic? So, how's your approach been different during the pandemic than it was previously, or is it really largely the same? And do you have any advice for NADO members on what we should be doing to continue to advocate virtually during this time?
Yeah, thank you, Misty. I think virtual lobbying is very similar to everyday lobbying. Instead of in-person meetings, we are doing phone calls and emails, and it is a lot. I feel like we have gotten a lot closer with staff. There's a lot more exchanging of quicker emails, quicker text messages, quick phone calls, where staff feel really comfortable. And that is because we've built those relationships over the years, and they feel that we are a confidant when they need one, and also a resource when they need one as well. And so I think it's been really good that it has helped that we've had those relationships going into this setting. And then also we have built quite a few new relationships with staff over this time period, and that is because we've been connecting them with their constituents so that they hear directly the need, and that we also have just been providing them the information that they want and need. And so I think being able to do those two things has helped us increase our relationships and make those ones very strong as well. I think so much of what the other panelists have mentioned is my advice to you all of, getting to know, obviously, the member is an ideal situation for them. To walk into a fundraiser and to know your face is always, it makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you have that personal connection with them. But the people that are really making the decisions and doing the work are the staff. And so for them to walk into the fundraiser and to know your face, or for you to walk into their congressional office and for them to come out and say, Jason, Misty, Don, Paul, how are you? How are the kids? What's the weather like? That is what really matters, because they're the ones who are doing the hard work and the ones that are going to tell their boss to vote yes on the floor, and really get our stuff over the line. And so I really would encourage you all in this time to continue those relationships any way that is possible. So inviting them to your board meeting is a great idea, sending them literature, keeping them in the know. When you're applying for an EDA grant, tell them you're applying and ask for a letter of congressional support. They want to do that for you, and it keeps them in the loop. And then they can show that their boss was helpful in getting you that EDA, or was helpful in your application. And they can use that as a press release when your organization wins that application. And so those are all things that are benefit both to you, but then also to them. And so it kind of is that partnership and that friendship that really matters. But yeah, I think it is just keeping them in the loop, letting them know what you're doing in the community, the needs you have. And like Paul mentioned, saying thank you moves mountains, especially in DC. I think a lot of times staff feel like they work really hard and they don't make a lot of money, and they feel stressed and all these things. And just to hear thank you from people and to know that they're making a difference and that it is worthwhile what they're doing, it really matters.
I agree wholeheartedly. Sometimes it's hard to step back and see the difference that we're making, because there's so many challenges out there to be overcome. So thank you, Becky. Finally, I want to ask Don, Jason, and Paul about any other advocacy priorities that you have for each of your communities as we proceed through into 2021 and beyond. Are there ongoing or future advocacy efforts you plan to engage in, or other key legislative priorities for your organizations or your states?
Thanks, Misty. I mean, I'll say that probably the things at the top of the list in our region or in our state probably aren't so different from the topics that are probably at the top of the list for most of you. These, I think there are policy initiatives around broadband, all infrastructure funding, childcare, and housing are probably some of the top things that come to mind. And again, there's nuances to what the exact policy issue is from community to community, from region to region, from state to state. But in general, those are pretty common, I think, top policy initiatives that we will continue to advocate around.
Yeah, so much of our efforts right now are focused on infrastructure, especially related to transportation and broadband. Specifically for our organization and our operations here, we're putting a significant amount of advocacy horsepower behind our aging programs. If there are a couple of things this pandemic has taught us, we need more high-speed internet, and we need more funding to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our most vulnerable population and our seniors. And so that's really what we're focused on right now.
And I couldn't agree more. I would say ditto to everything. Broadband, education, childcare, infrastructure. Those are all real important. I had the good fortune yesterday of actually serving on a Senate congressional panel to give testimony to the Senate Commerce Committee about cuts in Amtrak. We have a long distance line going right through our economic development district, and it hits 4 of the 5 counties that are in our DD. And so Senator Tester asked me to be a panelist along with the CEO of Amtrak. As some of you may know, as of Monday of this week, we went from daily service to 3 times a week service. And so we have lost significantly with regard to the frequency that citizens in our region can use Amtrak. And that's a big deal, especially for folks that rely on what's called the Empire Builder, our route, to go to medical appointments in Minnesota at the Mayo Clinic, to go to Seattle for medical appointments, see grandkids, and actually to get the jobs. So that will continue to be, at the federal level, a significant priority for our organization and also our state. The second priority, and this is kind of a basket of programs that our organization and our colleague organizations in Montana were very successful at reauthorizing a whole suite of economic development programs during Montana's 2019 legislature. And given everything that's happening with state budgets, we're very deeply concerned about what may happen with economic development programs when we're competing against programs that are feeding poor children and, they're hard to compete with. And so we're deeply worried about what's going to happen in the coming session that begins in January. We have a legislature that only meets for 90 days every 2 years. So if you miss that window, you got to wait for another 2 years to kind of make your pitch. And so we're going to be playing defense along with the other economic development districts spread throughout Montana to make sure that suite of programs continues on into the future.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Every 2 years, that's, I don't even know. I don't know what those 90 days must be like.
and some people think that we should meet for 2 days every 90 years in Montana.
Right. That's funny. Final question for Becky. In 2021, what issues and priorities do you expect will be at the forefront for the congressional leadership, and are there any anticipated policy developments in 2021 that you're tracking or predicting?
Yeah, that's another great question. So as many of you know, we have an election in 2 weeks that will, I think, depend and dictate many of the legislative goals of next year. I think that we will definitely see, either in this lame duck session or start of next year, another COVID-19 package. It'll definitely depend on results of the election to see what is all included in that, and what might be included in another one later in 2021. I think we will see an infrastructure package. Both parties are very interested in this. And Jason, you brought up a great point of rural broadband has been at the top of mind, and childcare too. And so these topics that we have seen come to light in COVID are definitely on the minds of legislators here in DC, and we will see policies circulating around these over the next coming months. But yeah, I think that we will, transportation, infrastructure, childcare, COVID-19, healthcare, all of these topics will have to be covered. And we also have to cover government funding in the next few weeks. And so it'll be an interesting ride into 2021, but I know that we are grateful that RLF is done and are still working to get additional funds for EDA included in any COVID package. So that is what I think we will see.
Great, thank you all. I think we're going to move into some Q&A. We did get a question from the audience. Have you heard if there's any movement on additional WIOA funding for job center staffing? Anyone?
I have not. That's definitely something we can check into. I don't know, Mariel, if you have heard other on.
Well, I would just say it looked like Chad maybe was directing the question to Jason, so I didn't know if you guys had specifically had a conversation about WIOA funding for job center staffing specifically that you could speak to. But what I will say from NATO's perspective is that workforce funding is one of many priorities that NATO advocates for as a member of a coalition. So with workforce funding, with transportation, with a lot of the aging, broadband, a lot of the other issues that we advocate on, we have coalitions of national associations based in DC that have a national membership, like the NATO membership, that we work with to try and move those priorities forward. And WIOA and workforce funding is absolutely one of the paramount priorities that we do advocate for. So I would just say that if NADO members have specific things that they would like us to advocate for, whether it's funding, whether it's regulatory reform, I would love to know kind of the challenges you're dealing with, what barriers you're meeting, because that always is the foundation for being able to tell those stories, being able to explain why it matters to have that policy change. And with RLF, we saw that, and with the EDA CARES Act, we saw that we had such an established way of a history of demonstrating projects that were valuable to those communities, or demonstrating this revolving loan fund program is extremely valuable to help keep small businesses afloat, but this perpetual reporting is unnecessarily burdensome to the community operators that are already burdened with doing lending and doing a lot of other kinds of activities that are very diverse. So I think just keeping us informed, letting us know kind of what advocacy specifically you're looking for from us, as well as telling us your success stories and really telling us in detail your challenges is absolutely fundamental to us being able to advocate for you. So please keep those stories coming, good and bad. We will make use of all of them as we continue to advocate for things like workforce funding.
Thanks, Muriel, for jumping in. Becky, another question for you. Is there any chance that we're going to get a long-term transportation bill passed? And have you heard anything about anything being included for inland rivers to become a major transportation corridor? So Mississippi and Missouri, Ohio, those kinds of things.
Yeah, so that is actually one of the other policy issues that we are tracking is a transportation reauthorization. There was language included in the CR that passed in mid-September that extended the FAST Act for 1 year reauthorization. We are hopeful that the Transportation Committee will take this up. The Senate bill was developed, passed out of committee, and then it was kind of up to the House of what they were doing. And so I think we will see movement there, but it just is going to depend on leadership and the conferencing of those two bills right now. I am not aware of anything that includes the inland rivers, but I will take a look to that and get that information out to you all.
Great, thank you. And since I've got you talking, what are your thoughts on the likelihood of an additional COVID-19 relief package either before or after the November election?
Well, so many of you might know this, but Speaker Pelosi is trying to get a deal together. I get emails once an hour that says they are still talking. What they are talking about, no one is sure. My optimistic side says like we might get a deal before the election, but my realistic side says we probably won't see anything until the lame duck. And then really, if depending on election results is really what is gonna either we will see a bill or we will wait until January.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to get one more question in here for any of the regional development organization executive directors on the line here. How proactive are all of you in engaging your congressional delegation about new or ongoing projects? So do you reach out to your member of Congress every time you begin a new project or a new initiative gets funded, or how does that work in your respective regions? And I would throw that out there to any of you that have a desire to answer that.
So yeah, I'll just say we do on a regular basis, as I mentioned in I think a couple of my comments earlier. We do continually keep especially our local field reps here in our region abreast of all of the activities that are going on, any projects that we have groundbreakings taking place, whether they have ribbon cuttings, you name it. If we have grant applications going in, I think I heard somebody mention that earlier, we will ask them to submit a support letter. So yes, and like I said, we try to keep them updated on a regular basis on what the status of all our projects are.
Christy, I would say that we do the same thing in Montana that Jason just mentioned. I think that's just good practice. The other thing that we do, we rely on them a lot when there's a new program that comes out. When there's a new program, particularly from the federal government that comes out, and we've never heard of it before, we don't know what the regs are, and sometimes even the agency personnel, they really don't know how this is going to work on the ground. If you have a congressional person, if you have a congressional staffer with you as you're making the call or as you're talking to somebody about that, it often cuts through the red tape. So we rely on them, our organization does, to help us understand new programs that come down the pipeline that we don't know a lot about.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I do have one other thing. It's 4:10, but we'll try to answer as many as we can. So COVID-19 has meant that interaction with campaigns and candidates has been limited. So Rick was wondering, what are the best things a district can do to start a relationship with a new member, a new elected official, and their staff when one has not previously existed? So if we get new members coming on, what are our first steps to building that relationship in COVID world?
I think one of the things, and we talked about this a little bit at the top of the session, is, we can use technology now to our advantage. And as new members come on board, they're going to be inundated, right, with getting up to speed and meeting new partners. And I think it's just an opportunity to do kind of an introductory, whether it's an email or you can set up a time for a Zoom call and just say, hi, I'm here. This is what we do. We'd love to continue to keep in touch about the things that we're working on. And if you have needs, please reach out to us. So, I think it's a real opportunity to just do that welcome with any new staff or congressional delegation that come on board after elections. I think that's just start building those relationships.
And I want to jump on this one too, because I just want to say, please reach out to NADO. One of the things that we offer to you as a member benefit is that we have contact lists of all the staff in the DC office. I think that's underutilized. We have all their email addresses. They might not be there answering their phones in person right now, but they're emailing. And it's not impossible to do, virtual meetings, Zoom meetings, virtual site visits. People are getting really creative what they're doing virtually right now. We can help you make some of those initial connections. So please do not hesitate to reach out, to ask for email addresses, to ask for staffers' names and roles and responsibilities. We also have field staff. So we can try to help with those connections. And that's definitely something we're here to do and we want to do to help NADO members.
Great. And Muriel and Becky, what can we as NADO members and regional development organizations do to demonstrate our appreciation for the additional EDA CARES Act funding and show EDA and our congressional delegation that we're using the funding effectively?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and something that we always need to be doing. And really it goes back to thanking them, especially if they are supportive of EDA and including additional funds for EDA. And if they were co-sponsors of the RLF Act, writing them just emails to the staff is always a good thing to be doing. But then also having letters to the editor in local papers is something that is very appreciative. Again, it's for that member to be able to point to saying, I am helping my community. I am working hard in Washington. It might look like nothing gets done here, but there is progress, and here's a piece of that. And so thanking them publicly and inviting them out to certain events when you can, where it is appropriate to thank them publicly there too for their support over the years.
And I would just say, I think the biggest question I'm anticipating now going forward is what's happening with this funding. We provided this funding, what's being done with it, what's happening with it, is it benefiting communities? That's a question we're going to get asked, Becky's going to ask. So again, the success stories, or even, we're at the beginning of the project and we're not sure yet, but we're figuring it out. And here are the needs we've identified and that we're trying to solve, hopefully partially using this funding source. Anything like that that you can share with us, those success stories will go a very long way in showing the appreciation and kind of confirming for the staff who kind of put themselves out there to help make this funding possible, that their effort was not in vain and that it's really helping.
Great. Thank you, Marielle, Becky, Dawn, Jason, Paul, for taking your time and for all of your information and for your advocacy and your efforts on behalf of the NADO membership and regional councils across the country. So now I'm going to turn it over to our executive director and our fearless leader, Joe McKinney, to close us out and conclude NADO's first annual training conference virtually. Joe, congratulations to you.
Thank you, Misty, and that was a fantastic session. Just want to thank you, Misty, and Dawn, and Paul, and Jason, as well as Becky and Muriel. I only have two things that I really wanted to add quickly, one of which is we could have had 50 to 100 of you on this panel, because it's amazing the effort that our NATO members really exerted in getting those two particular bills passed. We chose the three we did without telling them, but it came out clear, and that is relationship building. The fact that Jason has really built a friendship with someone over a long period of time. The fact that Dawn had a former employee who is in a position to help in this case. And I darn sure didn't know that my favorite senator was once a butcher for Paul Tuss. That's a new one on me, Paul. But those are the type of things. Mary and I were on a call last week. The RLF defederalization was originally part of a tax plan in 1987. So it's 33 years of work that just, I think all the factors came into being to make that a success, most of which was the relationships that we've developed and that you've developed over the years. So again, thanks to all of you for doing that. The other thing I'll mention is that we've also had some really good successes legislatively with funding in the aging program, in transportation and transit and workforce. We don't lead that coalition in DC. We're partners with other organizations. They look to us to take the lead in economic development. That's why we're focusing a lot on their successes. But we also, I want all of our members to know that we're daily working on funding and program support to those programs and many more. And just wanted to kind of gets lost in the shuffle. To conclude the conference, I just want to again thank everyone for attending. We had almost 300 folks attend. It's our first venture at a virtual conference this size, and I think it went really well. We were talking as staff this morning. We normally don't get a chance to sit through the sessions. We're worried about the temperature in the room or chairs or AV, but it has been fantastic for our staff to get to really be a part of the conference from a learning perspective, and it's just been great. I do want to mention that, and some of you may know, we are excited to have you in DC at some point in 2021. The exec committee has not canceled the policy conference yet. We discuss that every month, and I hope by the middle of December we'll have a decision. But we know from our caucus meetings that many of you are excited about getting together and networking, and I think that shows the value of that. We want to do that in as safe a possible manner as possible. So what I would tell you is that we're going to be very flexible next year, and I hope you will be as well. It may not be in March, it may be later. We may modify it in some capacity, but we do, when it's safe, want to get our group back together, because that the value of networking as well as getting on the Hill. Not that you can do that in person now, but we do hope for a day when we can do that. And I want to close by also mentioning that we do have NATO's annual business meeting coming up next Tuesday. It's at noon Eastern. For those that have not attended in the past, it's an opportunity to kind of see what the day-to-day priorities are of NATO, what we've been working on, what we hope to work on, to look at the business side of the organization, as well as discussion on the future. We just talked about what happens when you reach your dreams. And I can tell you, our exec committee, they don't let Muriel, Becky, or I rest, because we're already talking about what's next. And the fact that we did accomplish a huge goal, we want to dream big. And I will kind of tease you in the fact that one of the key staff in Senate leadership, once it was passed, said, this is the funding level EDA should have at all times. This is the the amount that the planning district should get. And so that was very encouraging to hear at least someone with that knowledge of EDA. So we're going to dream big. We're going to challenge our board next year to look at what we can accomplish, because I think it's just proven that the two things that we did accomplish was really years in the making. So I again encourage you, if you would like to attend the annual business meeting and you don't have a link to it, just shoot me an email and I'll be glad for you to attend. Following that, we have a board of directors meeting that, again, you're welcome to attend. It's open to all members, but it's a chance for the board to conduct the business of the organization. So we encourage you to attend if you do have an interest. So with that, I just again want to say thank you to everyone in attendance. Thanks to our panelists. And we look forward to seeing you next year. So we'll conclude. I'll meet y'all at the bar at some point in the near future. So thank you so much.